goes. So let's talk about the mountaintop so that we can dig into this maybe a little bit more. So Brian, why don't you tell us about this week's mountaintop with Celebrimbor?
So we talked about Sauron working through influence. We talked about the way that he works through influence is aligning big picture goals that the person already had, their intrinsic motivations, the things that they want to achieve. And the way that he corrupts those big picture goals is that he makes them selfish. He encourages other people to be very self-centered and very narrow focused in pursuing their goals to the point where they start to lose context, and then he can really guide the way that they're going. And so the greatest example of this is about halfway through season 2, Celebrimbor has been creating these rings, and he's been told to stop by his king. And he's, there's some warning signs going around. And Sauron sort of pitches we need to make more rings very mildly, but in a way that is very motivational. And Celebrimbor, on his own initiative, writes a letter to his king saying, "Oh, everything's fine, and we've stopped making the rings, and we thank you for your advice, and we're following everything you said." And then goes and does the exact opposite. And he's abandoning his principles at that moment. He's abandoning his people. He's abandoning his loyalties. He's abandoning kind of good sense, listening to the people you should probably be listening to, in favor of listening to this voice that's telling him to do the thing that he really wanted to do anyway. But he's crossed over from not really thinking about the context to actually putting up firewalls, to lying to people about it. And so this is our moment where this character is influenced to the point where he starts to make really bad decisions, right? And starts to, even in the terminology of the series, right? He introduces corruption into his product. He's no longer of pure mind trying to do this for the benefit of the world. He's convinced himself that the ends justify the means. And so now he's starting to change the way that he interacts with those around him. And from this point forward, Celebrimbor pushes his workers incredibly hard, and they go from sort of adoring him to being really frustrated. Why aren't you listening to us? This isn't going well, right? He loses the trust of his followers. He loses awareness of reality. And he starts doing increasingly harmful things in the world with all of the real power and real skill that he's developing. So this is our mountaintop moment, is the point at which Celebrimbor starts to abandon his principles.
And the way that he influences, this is where we want to learn. I think there's two things for us to learn here, at least right now, that I'm seeing. One is, how do we influence like Sauron, but not do it in a manipulative way, not do it so that somebody is able to just get short-term gains out of it, but to help them achieve long-term goals. And I think part of it is, he really, like you said, he helps them even to understand what their value proposition is. And we can apply this to business. What value are you trying to get? And when we say value, we don't necessarily mean a dollar amount, because most of us, a dollar amount is just a means to have some sort of an experience. It's a means to some sort of a ideal world of flourishing, whatever it is, depending on the goal there. But so he helps them to find that value that they're looking for. So in the situation with Celebrimbor, right, what's valuable to him is to have his name in the history books. And he just twists it just a little bit, because that's what a deceiver does. There's nothing wrong with Celebrimbor having his name in the history books, right? In fact, he could do it for a really good reason. He could have his name in the history books because he created something that helped humans and elves or whoever else to flourish.
Right.
But he kind of just slowly turns it so that he loses sight of that. So for us, it's so important to be able to do both things, to help somebody to understand their value statement, make sure our organizations have a clear understanding of what does the user want? What do our customers actually want out of this? Do we understand that? And then beyond that, and this is the magnanimous aspect of it, not just to capitalize on that and then slowly, well, if I do the marketing this way, if I do that, but instead, what type of a world are we creating? And is this world going to create more freedom for the person, for our customer, for our user? Or is it going to create less freedom for them? And that's a hard question to answer sometimes.
Right. No, I think that's right, is that we see on-screen direct influence where he encourages these people to do things that they sort of wanted to do already, but to sort of lose track of the big picture while they're doing it. Once they bought into oh, I must be doing the right thing, once they get very focused on the task at hand, he sort of helps them lose track of the fact that they might be drifting away from doing the right thing, right? To some extent, that short game versus long game is the same effect that the rings are having, right? Giving all the dwarf lords rings makes them very focused on wealth and power in the extreme short term, and makes then sort of they lose track of what whether they're giving up some of their authority. Celebrimbor loses track of like, oh, these things aren't having the effect that I wanted.
Okay, so how does that play out then? He understands somebody's value proposition, which we can also do. We need to understand their
Right.
value proposition, but then he's able to use that. He's able to use the big levers rather than using all these complex strategies that a lot of these other leaders use that become brittle.
Yeah, I think that's the big takeaway here is the idea that you can use a big picture context and align it with people's intrinsic motivations. If you can do that, if you can position, it's not really even about positioning yourself. It's about presenting a vision of the future that aligns with people's intrinsic motivations. If you can do that, they will work incredibly hard in that direction. Like as a good leadership lesson, that's valuable, right? That's actually what really great leaders would do. If you think of somebody that's inspirational, if you think of a Martin Luther King or a John F. Kennedy or somebody who's like really good at standing up and saying, let's go this way, or this is the thing you wanted anyway, let's go do that. We should go to the moon. That would be so cool. We could go to the moon, and we have to beat the Soviets. That would be so important. We have to beat the Soviets, right? People thought those things were great anyway, and so they were able to kind of get spun up on them and the compelling vision. Like that is the positive lesson from this style of leadership. And the other positive lesson, I think, is willingness to work shoulder by shoulder, the willingness to not present yourself as a director authority, but as a co-conspirator or an ally or an advisor is a style of leadership that allows people to feel very empowered. And that part is good, right? Getting people to work on things that they're passionate about is important. Getting people to feel like they're empowered is important. Right. What we see Sauron doing is very skillfully here is then twisting it to his own ends, which is maybe not what we desire in our magnanimous leaders. But I think that's the fun part about watching this evolution is this idea that he is actually very, very good at what he does. And like you said, unlike the Hans Gruber plan from Die Hard or the Silva plan from Skyfall or the Riddler plan for Batman, it's not brittle. It's not a very specific plan that requires other people to behave in specific ways. And it's not short-term focused on just achieving this one thing. It's high level and it's iterative and it's reactive and it's robust. And so that's what makes him one of the most compelling villains I think that we've studied.